Not loud rain, not storms, just a slow, gray curtain that covered the city like a forgotten memory. The streets glistened under tired streetlights, and people walked with their heads down as though they were carrying invisible weights no one else could see. Elias stood at the bus stop near the edge of the old district, his hands deep inside his coat pockets. The cold wind pressed against him, but it was not the weather that made him shiver. It was the feeling that his life had stopped moving long ago. At 28, Elias had imagined a different future for himself. Years ago, he believed he would become an architect. He used to draw buildings in notebooks during school, sketching impossible bridges and homes filled with light. His teachers praised him. His friends admired him. But life had quietly changed direction. His father became ill. Bills piled up. Dreams became responsibilities. Responsibilities became routines. And routines slowly became chains. Now he worked in a warehouse on the night shift, stacking boxes beneath flickering fluorescent lights. Every day felt exactly like the one before it. Wake up, work, sleep, repeat. Somewhere along the way, he stopped asking himself what he wanted. That evening, after another exhausting shift, Elias missed the last bus home. The station was nearly empty except for an old woman sitting alone beneath the shelter. She wore a dark green coat and held a closed umbrella across her lap. Though the air was freezing, she looked strangely peaceful. Elias sat several feet away, staring at the wet road. "You look like someone waiting for permission," the woman suddenly said. Elias frowned slightly. "Excuse me," she smiled faintly without looking at him. "Most people are. Waiting for a sign, waiting for certainty, waiting for someone to tell them they're allowed to begin." Elias gave a tired laugh. Maybe they're waiting because life doesn't really give many chances. The woman finally turned toward him. "No," she said softly, "life gives doors. Fear convinces people they're walls." Something about the way she said it unsettled him. He looked away. "Easy to say." The woman nodded slowly. "Yes. Very hard to believe." Silence settled between them again. Rain tapped against the roof of the shelter. Then she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small silver key. "This belonged to my husband," she said. "Before he died, he told me something strange. He said, when you meet someone who has forgotten themselves, give them this." Elias stared at the key. "Why would I need it?" "Because something in you already knows the door is open." Before he could respond, headlights appeared in the distance. The woman stood as the bus approached. She gently placed the key into Elias' hand. Then she stepped onto the bus and disappeared into the rain. Elias sat frozen for several seconds. The key was old and cold against his skin. No address, no markings, just a key. For the next several days, Elias carried the key everywhere without understanding why. At work, he found himself touching it inside his pocket during quiet moments. Sometimes he wondered if the woman had simply been eccentric. Other times, he felt there was something important hidden beneath her words. One night, unable to sleep, Elias searched through an old box in his apartment closet. Inside were his childhood sketches, pages filled with buildings, towers, glass ceilings, parks suspended in the air. He stared at them for nearly an hour. A painful realization slowly rose inside him. He had not stopped dreaming because he failed. He had stopped because he became afraid to hope again. The thought sat heavily in his chest. The next morning, while walking home from work, Elias noticed a narrow alley he had never paid attention to before. At the far end stood a tiny antique shop squeezed between two abandoned buildings. A faded wooden sign above the door read, "Open, but the windows were dusty and the place looked closed for years." Elias paused. Something pulled at him. Without understanding why, he walked toward the shop. The moment he entered, a bell rang softly overhead. The air smelled like old paper and cedar wood. Shelves crowded the room from floor to ceiling, filled with clocks, maps, books, and strange objects from forgotten times. Behind the counter sat an elderly man with silver hair and sharp eyes. "You took longer than expected," the man said calmly. Elias froze. "What?" The old man looked at the silver key in Elias' hand. "She found you. A chill moved through Elias' body. "You know the woman from the bus stop?" The man nodded. "Long ago." Elias stepped closer. "Who are you people?" The old man smiled gently. "People who learned something important too late." He motioned toward a door at the back of the shop. Unlike everything else around it, the door looked new, smooth black wood, no handle, only a small silver keyhole. Elias stared at it. His heart began beating faster. "What's behind it?" he whispered. The old man leaned back in his chair. "That depends on what you're still afraid to become." Elias swallowed hard. "This is some kind of trick." "Perhaps," the old man replied. "But you didn't come here because you were curious. You came because some part of you already recognizes this door." The room suddenly felt smaller. Elias looked at the key again. His mind told him to leave. But another voice, quiet and deep, told him to stay. Slowly he walked toward the black door. His hand trembled as he inserted the silver key. The lock clicked instantly. Then silence. Elias hesitated. "What happens if I open it?" The old man answered carefully. "You stop standing outside your own life." Elias closed his eyes for a moment. Then he pushed the door open. Warm sunlight flooded across his face. He blinked in confusion. The warehouse, the rain, the antique shop, all gone. Elias now stood inside a massive open hall filled with white drafting tables and enormous windows overlooking a glowing city skyline. People moved around the room carrying blueprints and models. The atmosphere vibrated with energy and purpose. At the center of the hall stood a younger version of himself, confident, focused, alive. The younger Elias looked up and smiled. "You finally came." Elias stepped backward in shock. "This isn't real." The younger version laughed softly. "No, it's more real than the life you settled for." Elias stared around the room. "What is this place?" "A possibility," the younger Elias answered. "The life you abandoned the moment you decided disappointment was safer than hope." The word struck deeply. Elias looked away. "I had responsibilities." "Yes," the younger version said gently, "but responsibilities became your excuse to stop believing in yourself." Silence filled the hall. Elias felt anger rise inside him. "You think I wanted things to turn out this way?" "No," the younger self replied. "But every year you convinced yourself it was too late." The younger Elias walked toward one of the giant windows. "Do you know what fear does?" Elias said nothing. "It makes closed prisons out of open doors." Outside the window, the glowing city stretched endlessly into the horizon. Beautiful, alive, possible. Elias suddenly felt grief unlike anything he had known before. Not grief for another person, grief for himself. For the years he abandoned his own voice. For the dreams he buried alive. Tears slowly filled his eyes. "I don't know how to start again," he admitted quietly. The younger Elias smiled sadly. "You think doors only open once. That's the lie." The room began shifting around them. The walls dissolved into countless floating scenes from Elias' life. Moments where he almost applied to architecture school again. Moments where he almost shared his drawings. Moments where he almost believed in himself. Each time fear had whispered, "Later, not now, you'll fail, you're too old, you missed your chance." Elias watched silently as those moments drifted past like ghosts. Then the younger version spoke one final time. The door was never locked. Everything went white. Elias woke up on the floor of the antique shop. The old man sat quietly nearby, reading a book. For several seconds, Elias could not breathe properly. It had felt real, too real. The old man closed the book gently. "Most people cry when they return." Elias touched his face. His cheeks were wet. "What was that place?" "A mirror," the old man answered. "Not of who you are, of who you refuse to become." Elias slowly stood. The black door behind him was gone. Only an empty wall remained. "Why show me this?" The old man looked at him carefully. "Because people spend their lives waiting for certainty before they move forward. But certainty rarely comes first. The door opens first. Confidence comes after you walk through it." Elias lowered his eyes. For the first time in years, he felt something unfamiliar inside himself. Not happiness, not confidence, but movement, a quiet awakening, like a frozen river beginning to crack beneath winter ice. "What do I do now?" he asked. The old man smiled. "Anything." The following months were not magical. Elias did not suddenly become successful overnight. He still worked long shifts. He still struggled financially. He still doubted himself many times. But something fundamental had changed. He enrolled in evening architecture classes. He began drawing again every morning before work. He shared his designs online. At first, no one noticed. Then a few people did. Then more. Small opportunities appeared. A local cafe asked him to redesign their interior space. A community center invited him to help create a public garden project. For the first time in years, Elias felt connected to his own life instead of trapped inside it. One evening, nearly a year later, Elias walked past the old alley again. But the antique shop was gone. Only empty brick walls remained. No sign, no door, no trace it had ever existed. Elias stood there quietly for a long moment. Then he smiled, because he finally understood. The shop had never been the real door, he was. Years later, Elias became known for designing spaces filled with light, openness, and nature. People often described his buildings the same way. They make you feel like breathing again. During an interview, a young student once asked him, "What changed your life?" Elias thought for a moment before answering. "When I stopped waiting for proof that I could succeed." The student frowned slightly. "How did you know it was time?" Elias smiled softly. "I didn't." He looked out the window at the city beyond. You move because something inside you already knows the door is open. And somewhere, far beyond fear and hesitation, another door quietly opened.